Uh, Hello, welcome everyone to our tip card research seminar tonight. I'm Gloria Wong from the Department of Social Work and Social Administration, Hong Kong University, and I'm also the project coordinator of this very exciting 3-year project, which is now coming to an end. So before we start, may I ask everyone, so during the presentation, please kindly mute yourself so that we can proceed smoothly. So tonight, this is actually the first of our series of presentations and sharing from the TIP project. Before we start, I also would like to mention to you all that our session tonight will be recorded. So I hope this is okay with everyone. And also after tonight's session, we'll put the video recording, and also our speakers has kindly agreed to share this PowerPoint slides online. So you'll be able to find the recording and also the PowerPoint on our tip card website. So first of all, I want to share with you that this project tip card, the full title is Tools to Inform Policy, Chinese Communities Action in Response to Dementia. It is a piece of work that is made possible by a lot of people, collaborators, and our important researchers. Some of them are here tonight to share with us the findings and very exciting results from 3 years of work. So you will have noticed that in our promotion materials and when you're registering for tonight's event, this is the first of a series of events. So after tonight, we will have another 2 research seminar sessions next week. What we haven't mentioned to you is that actually we are going to have a very exciting event this coming Saturday, which is a research, a hybrid symposium where we have invited 2 very important speakers. So one is Professor Martin Knapp from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and also Professor Gloria Wong from the Peking University Institute of Mental Health. So they will be sharing with us the development of dementia action plan in China, and also the global situation of dementia policy. And in the coming Saturday, we will have opportunity to share the local Hong Kong situation and our findings together with these experts from China and international experts. So I hope you will be able to join us on the coming Saturday. And you will find in the chat box that we have put in the information for the coming Saturday. So hopefully we'll see you all in the coming Saturday as well. So and tonight actually we have quite a very exciting lineup, because we have 3 our very promising early career researchers sharing with us a piece of work that we quite a major piece of work looking at all the interventions that has been reported in Chinese community. So I think without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker. So Dr. Shi Cheng. So Dr. Shi, she's now a research assistant professor at the School of Graduate Studies and Institute of Policy Studies at Lingnan University. So Cheng and I have known each other for many years now. At the beginning, we met each other at the London School of Economics and Political Science, and now and then afterwards, Cheng joined the University of Hong Kong to help us with this project. And Cheng's interest is mainly about how social policy can respond to dynamic care needs against social demographic changes and its impact on formal, informal caregiving and service utilization, both from the demand and also from the supply side, to assist evidence-based policymaking, and her research focused on 3 interrelated areas, including long-term care policy, retirement arrangement and care preferences, and also advancing support for people living with dementia. And in the TIPCAT project, she has been very she used many different methods, multiple data sources to examine the cause of dementia with detailed analysis of formal and informal care, and also factors that affect cost estimation. And on top of that, she also drives a major systematic review looking at the effectiveness of intervention for dementia in Chinese communities, which is, I think, what Cheng, you're going to share with us now. So,
thank you, Gloria.
Thank you so much. Shall I pass the time to you?
Thank you so much, Gloria. Well, I have learned a lot from you and other co-PS during my TIPCAT journey. So I really enjoy the whole process. So I'm very glad to share with you this large-scale systematic review. Let me share my screen. Okay, I think it's working. Okay, great. This is a very large-scale systematic review. That's why we took almost 3 years for completing this study. This study focused on dementia interventions in Chinese population and the TIPCAT project. Let me see. Okay, it's working. Why do we want to do this study? As you may know that the Chinese population is the world's greatest number of people with dementia. 20 of the global persons with dementia are Chinese. And also from the right side, this figure showed that the prevalence of dementia in mainland China will continuously increase. While Chinese community also will be the major drive in continued growth in global dementia prevalence. However, we noticed that most evidence on interventions for people with dementia and their caregivers have been generated in Western countries, although we noticed the Chinese communities are where more dementia occur. However, those identified evidence on interventions for dementia perhaps have not effective for Chinese populations, because the interventions in fact may differ due to cultural differences or pharmacogenetic factors between Chinese and Western populations. And we need a higher level of evidence for identifying effective dementia-related intervention for Chinese populations. And these findings can be used to inform policymaking and practice, such as developing the dementia national strategy and also regular care plan. In England, the government identified effective intervention, that is cognitive stimulation therapy. So we think perhaps we can also identify some effective interventions for Chinese communities. Meanwhile, we also noticed that the value of Chinese databases have been long neglected in current review studies. So we would like to know what interventions have been studied in Chinese communities for dementia and what are their effectiveness. So in this large-scale systematic review, we would like to know what dementia interventions work in Chinese communities. We aim to map interventions for dementia studied in Chinese communities, and also to compare the effectiveness of these interventions for achieving desired outcomes. And apart from informing policymaking, we also think about use those evidence to inform another study and the TIPCAT project, that is a simulation modeling. So we would like to know what interventions should be included in future care pathway and what is the expected impact of the changing care pathway. Okay, so how did we do this study? We actually have published our protocol on BMG Open. Regarding the eligible criteria, our population are the adults living with dementia, including MCI, and also their caregivers in Chinese communities. We included any type of interventions, comparators, or outcomes, but we only focus on RCT studies because the evidence is more robust. And we also set some requirements for the sample size, diagnostic criteria, and the generating random allocation sequence to ensure the study quality. We included studies published in English and Chinese. The publication period is from January 2008 to June 2020. Okay. So apart from the widely used English database, we also used two widely used Chinese databases. Those two Chinese databases include almost all the journals in mainland China. And we collaborated with the international dementia project, that is STRIDE. So we use the same search terms related to dementia and interventions. There are 53 items, and we also translated them into Chinese. Okay, so actually we have two rounds review process. The second round is used to update our included studies. And in the very beginning, we actually identified 88,000 studies in Chinese database. We actually didn't expect that there were so many studies have been published regarding dementia. So we involved many colleagues to contribute in this project. Well, after a few rounds review and screening, eventually we included 525 unique studies for data synthesis. So those are huge studies. And we also used the version 2 of the Cochrane risk of bias tool for assessing the study quality. So there are a few signaling questions for each domain. There are 5 domains for assessing the study quality. And based on that, we generated an overall judgment. And in today's presentation, I and the other two colleagues, Dara and Vicky, we will report the findings from this large-scale systematic review. So my part will focus on the systematic mapping review. I will report the findings aimed to map interventions for dementia studied in Chinese communities. Okay, first of all, where did these studies conducted? We noticed that actually the most regions in mainland China have a few RCTs. And in those 3 provinces, Henan, Zhejiang, and Guangdong, they have the most RCTs. And also we identified some studies from Hong Kong and Taiwan. And we also observed an increasing trend of the publication, the number of the publications. And particularly after 2011, well, you can see the increase here. And also regarding the dementia tab, current RCTs focus on vascular dementia and Alzheimer's diseases. Also some studies, they focus on mild cognitive impairment, MCI. And also some studies, they didn't specify what type of dementia of their patient. And 2/3 of the publications mentioned their study were funded from national or provincial funder. And the majority of our included RCTs are published in Chinese. Regarding the intervention categories, well, this is the part we actually most interested in. 35% of the RCTs, they focus on multi-component interventions, and followed 30% of the RCTs focus on pharmaceutical interventions, and 18% of them focus on non-pharmacological interventions, NPI, and also 14% of the RCTs focus on traditional Chinese medicine. Oh, this is a very broader intervention categories, and we actually further look at its tab. For example, for the pharmaceutical part, we identified 32 RCTs, they focus on anti-dementia drugs. And 14 RCTs, they use the psychotropic medications. And there are some studies, they use multiple drugs. And there are also some other drugs. It's quite difficult to further categorize them because the variety of these interventions. And regarding the traditional Chinese medicine, the majority of these RCTs, they use the herb medicine. And also there are some studies, they use acupuncture and massage. And 2 RCTs, they use a combination. Regarding the non-pharmacological interventions, well, you can see 40 RCTs, they use the comprehensive care interventions and the multi-component NPI. And there are also studies, 18, they use the cognitive interventions. And also 11 RCTs focus on physical exercise, and some interventions like psychosocial interventions were tried. Okay, so regarding the majority of these RCTs, as I mentioned earlier, they use the multi-component interventions. Over 100 RCTs, they use the combination of pharmaceutical intervention and traditional Chinese medicine. So this is quite popular in those included RCTs. And also 34 RCTs, they use the traditional Chinese medicine combined with the non-pharmaceutical intervention. And also some interventions, they combine pharmaceutical intervention and non-pharmacological intervention. And there are also some other combinations. More specifically, we further explore the combination of these multi-component interventions. Well, you can see in this figure, the pink dot means the traditional Chinese medicine. And the blue dot refer to the pharmaceutical interventions, such as anti-dementia drugs, other drugs, and antihypertensive. And for the non-pharmaceutical, non-pharmacological interventions, they are in purple color. Well, although we noticed that the combination between the combination with herbal medicine is quite a lot, because you can see the dot is this is the biggest dot. However, actually, the combination with the pharmaceutical intervention, like anti-dementia drugs and other drugs, we saw the combinations is more diverse, as there are more connections that lie here. Okay. Regarding the outcomes measured in this include RCTs, most RCTs, they focus on cognition and functioning. Well, some studies also focus on the outcomes like behavior, memory, and the quality of life, but very few of them. And as well as depression and care-related outcomes, there are only 4 RCTs we identified. Okay, in terms of the study quality, we use the risk of bias assessment. So the overall bias show that over 80% RCTs are judged as some concerns in the yellow. Well, regarding the specific domains, majority of the RCTs are judged at a low risk in domain 3 and 4, the measurement of the outcomes and the missing outcome data. Well, for the domain 5 and the domain 1 and 2, the most of RCTs show there are some concerns. Okay, so so far we found that the evidence on interventions for dementia among Chinese populations is dramatically increasing, particularly in Chinese publications. And those publications covered most regions in mainland China. And those RCTs have been conducted for a wide range of interventions in Chinese communities, including many non-pharmacological treatment and traditional Chinese medicine. And we also found that multi-component interventions were preferred in many RCTs. That means in some policy, in the future policy making, we may focus, we perhaps need to focus more on the combination impact, because so far, usually the recommendations in the regular care plan or the national dementia strategy, they are more focused on single intervention. So perhaps in the future, we can more focus on the combination, combined impact of the multi-component interventions. And most interventions, they target improving cognition and functioning ability, while quality of life and other outcomes were less considered in current RCTs. Meanwhile, very few studies focus on care-related interventions and outcomes. And for the study quality, the included RCTs are mostly subject to some concerns due to lacking information on randomization process and deviations from intended interventions and the selection of the reported result. We are thinking that perhaps because the requirement in Chinese publications is a little bit different from the Chinese publications. But I think this is also the part we can improve in the future. So this is my part. We'll pass time to my colleague Dara for the next part on the effectiveness.
Yes, thank you so much, Cheng. A very precise summary of a huge amount of work. I just, before we move on, I just want to mention, share with everyone that when Cheng, when we start thinking about this meta-analysis, we start off imagining that this would be a small, nice and small piece of work that would be completed rather quickly. But then when we start to search all the Chinese database, we realized actually the task is quite gigantic. So it's a total surprise to us. So I think this is the first time someone actually looked systematically into dementia interventions in Chinese population, including publication in Chinese. The motivation we had was we want, because most evidence of interventions in people with dementia were published in Western societies. We are not sure whether those can be directly translated into Chinese population. So we want to look at what do we know so far, what do we have in our existing literature base. And another motivation is because we know that for most people living with dementia and their family members, the important outcome would be what might help them to improve quality of life. Although cognition is also something of concern, but it's a little bit disappointing that after we do this search, we noticed that the bulk of evidence is still focusing on cognition and functioning. But hopefully later on we'll see more diverse outcome, including positive outcomes in future Chinese studies. So actually that you may have other questions for Cheng, but I would like to, in the interest of time, I would like to move on to the next speaker first. But by all means, put down, if you have questions, please feel free to put down your questions in the chat box, and then we can have a bit of time towards the end for question and answer. Okay, so actually, Cheng set a very nice background for our next speaker, Dr. Dara Leung. So Dr. Dara Leung is currently Research Assistant Professor at the Department of Social Work and Social Administration, Hong Kong University. And Dara has been instrumental for completion of this meta-analysis and network analysis. So quick introduction. So Dr. Leung's research centers around dementia and late life depression and focusing on enhancing well-being of older people, including people with dementia and their carers. And she used mixed methods research approach to explore application of positive psychology, self-compassion, and technology in improving well-being. And she's now involved in a large-scale community research, actually multiple projects, promoting awareness and developing service models for late life depression and family carers for older people. And she collaborates with researchers from various disciplines, including clinical psychologists, social workers, and community stakeholders to transfer knowledge to the real world. And she's also engaged in international projects informing the development of dementia care in lower middle income countries, and also digital interventions for the dementia population. And in this TIPCAT project, Dr. Leung identifies factors that contribute to the successful interventions by reviewing the effectiveness of pharmacological and non-pharmacological interventions in managing cognitive function and also behavior, distressed behavior among people living with dementia. So that's trying to summarize Dara's work in a few sentences. Should I pass the time to you?
Thank you, Gloria, and I'm very honored to be part of the gigantic project and review. And thank you so much for John to summarize and provide a very comprehensive yet concise background, so that I don't really need to repeat that part of it. So I'm going to share my screen, right? That's okay. Right. So after knowing that there are so many interventions existing in the Chinese population, the next questions that I would ask, or actually maybe other people would ask, would be, what is the most effective way to improve cognitive function among people living with dementia? So in answering these questions, I conducted a network meta-analysis. So a brief introduction to what a network meta-analysis is that when we do RCT, we compare two different interventions, A or B, and in other RCT, we may compare B and C. And we have this direct effect for each of these intervention comparison. But then we don't really know how A and C related. So in this network meta-analysis, we have some statistical and analytical power to calculate the indirect effect between intervention A and C, so that we can have a ranking or comparison for all three interventions. So for this network meta-analysis, we include intervention studies that measure cognitive abilities using MMSE. So in MMSE, the highest score is 30. It ranges from 0 to 30, and a higher score indicates a better cognitive function. And we also include studies that only compare different intervention modalities. So we're not including those that are comparing different intensity. So if an intervention is comparing psychosocial intervention that lasts for 10 weeks to another intervention that lasts for 12 weeks. We are not including that in this network meta-analysis. So after the screening that Zhang has mentioned, we include 268 studies that reported the cognitive measure using MMSE, and it include 35,804 people with dementia. It includes 22 treatments that Zhang has mentioned before. And so I've listed all of these here. And then we can see that the most common one would be pharmacological intervention plus traditional Chinese medicine, followed by anti-dementia drugs alone. And then we have kind of 549 arms of interventions in total, and that includes 285 pairwise comparison. So this is a general overview of the proportion of interventions included in the network meta-analysis and the proportion of comparison between each of the interventions. So if you see the bigger dots, it means that there are more interventions. So the largest would be here, the pharmacological intervention plus traditional Chinese medicine. And the thickest slide, the thicker it is, the more comparison it is. So there will be quite a lot between comprehensive care and anti-dementia drugs, and also between usual care and pharmacological intervention plus non-pharmacological interventions. So then we did pairwise meta-analysis. Is a very gigantic table, and if you're watching this on your phone or tablet, you probably can't really see what the numbers are. Basically, these are those with direct comparison between two interventions. So those that are yellow indicates that the interventions are less effective in comparison to another, and the green one is more effective than the other interventions. So if you are looking at anti-dementia drugs, it is relative compared to acupuncture and massage is less effective. So anti-dementia drugs is less effective than acupuncture and massage, but it is more effective than the usual care condition. And with these in mind and with the statistical power, we can have another network meta-analysis findings. So based on those with direct effect, we calculate those with indirect effect. And similarly, you can see that basically pharmacological intervention plus plus traditional Chinese medicine is basically more effective than most of the other interventions here. And then also pharmacological interventions plus non-pharmacological interventions are more effective than pharmacological interventions alone or non-pharmacological interventions alone. So these are the summary of the network meta-analysis. So that we are saying that we are comparing which one is more effective. So in the next slide, we're going to rank the interventions. So on the left side, we are ranking it to compare it to treatment as usual. So the highlighted ones are those that are more effective, significantly more effective than treatment as usual. So traditional Chinese medicine plus non-pharmacological interventions, pharmacological interventions plus traditional Chinese medicine would be the top two that are the most effective compared to the treatment as usual condition. And using another the statistical analysis, we can see how they really how well they are compared to each of the others, and we come up with a ranking for all of the interventions. And the top would be traditional Chinese medicine plus the non-pharmacological interventions, followed by pharmacological interventions plus the traditional Chinese medicine. These are the effectiveness are much higher compared to the rest of them, the other interventions. And it's quite interesting that it seems that traditional Chinese medicine works quite well in the Chinese population, which I'm not entirely sure whether it's what's the mechanism behind. Maybe we're more adapted to traditional Chinese medicine, or there are much more studies on traditional Chinese medicine in the Chinese population. We are not entirely sure whether these findings can be replicated in Western or other populations. So, but then we need to be aware of that quite a lot of majority of the studies have some concerns regarding the risk of bias. So only one study had a low risk of bias. So some of the take-home message is that majority of the pharmacological and non-pharmacological interventions were more effective than the usual care, especially traditional Chinese medicine and non-pharmacological interventions that incorporate in one as one interventions appear to be the most effective. And then we need more rigorous research in the Chinese population, because majority of them have some concerns on the risk of bias. And we can see there are quite some heterogeneity in intervention content, because there's no standardized protocol. So when we are saying that traditional Chinese medicine is more effective, we can't really tell which component of it is more effective, which acupuncture, say if acupuncture is effective, which area, which point is the most effective. We can't really say that. And even for non-pharmacological interventions, the intervention content diverse. We have some that focus on cognition and some other focusing on physical intervention, but then as a whole, they are more effective. So we may have suggest to have some more standardized protocol so that the comparison would be more fair. And you also have to be cautioned that these are some indirect evidence. There are limited number of comparison among some of the interventions, as if you remember that that circle with the network graph, there are some comparisons without there are some interventions without direct comparison, and we are not entirely sure if that if the indirect evidence is completely saying the truth for those intervention comparison. Okay, so this this is the end of my presentation. I'm trying to keep it short because I know Vicky is going to share much more with us. Thank you so much for your attention. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat box or later in the Q&A session.
Great. Thank you so much, Dara. I think that's actually very interesting. And for one thing, I think it's very encouraging to see that actually most intervention, whatever you do, seems to be better than usual care. However, we might want to also know what are the usual care in the Chinese community setting, and that may be something that is changing. And I'm sure that later on, when we publish this finding, we'll be able to share more with you. But in the interest of time, let me introduce our last, but not least, the last speaker of tonight. So Dr. Vicky Wang. So Dr. Wang is a research assistant professor at the School of Graduate Studies and Institute of Policy Studies at Lingnan University, and she actually was one of our graduates here. So she earned her doctorate degree from Hong Kong U Department of Social Work and Social Administration, and her research interests include mindfulness-based intervention and also randomized control studies. And she has published a series of meta-analysis and systematic reviews exploring the effectiveness of various interventions for enhancing the psychological well-being of older adults. And Dr. Wang is also a registered social worker in Hong Kong. So Vicky, thank you so much. Let's pass the time to you.
Thank you, Gloria, for the introduction, and also thanks for Dr. Shi for her work, kind of really a large work. And basically my work was based on Dr. Shi's cleaning of the data and gathering pile up of this evidence. And also thank everyone in this team that involved me into this wonderful, surprising and gigantic project. So next, I will briefly introduce my research. Well, like totally based on Dr. Shi's previous work. So I will briefly introduce the effectiveness of interventions for improving the daily functioning of people with dementia in the Chinese community, peer-wise and network meta-analysis of randomized control trials. So based on Dr. Shi's introduction, my research was coming from her 525 studies. So in total, 299 studies meet the inclusion criteria, but 2 of the studies had a very extreme effect size. So we excluded these 2 studies in further analysis. And one of the study adopted the intervention of caregiver support, and one included the surgery as an intervention. So as these are cannot grouped with other interventions, so I excluded them from my further analysis. And then in total, there were around 3,200 participants included in this meta-analysis. So in terms of the study characteristics, we can see that most of the studies were conducted in Chinese, and some of them also published in international journals and were written in English. And most of the studies were conducted in the setting of hospital and among the participants of inpatients. And most of the studies were receiving some fundings to support the study. And most of the dementia types included in the studies were vascular dementia. And similar to the results of Dr. Shi and Dr. Dara Leung, the specific intervention types are kind of quite diverse. And then we further categorize these specific intervention types into 5 major intervention categories, including the multi-component interventions, which is the most included most of the studies. And then we have the pharmaceutical studies and non-pharmaceutical interventions, traditional Chinese medicine, and only 3 studies that involved the intervention of supplements and other nutritional interventions. So in terms of the outcome measures, we can see that most of the studies use the activities of daily living scale, ADL, and then there are also other scales that were used to try to measure the daily functioning of the dementia patients. And because of the diversity of these different interventions and the studies, I adopted the random effect model to perform the meta-analysis. And then I used the HEDGES-G as the to calculate the effect size using these 3 formulas proposed by Dr. Morris in the year of 2008. And then I used the Q statistics and the I-square to try to measuring the heterogeneity of the different studies. And then to conduct these data analysis, I used the metaphor package and to conduct the pairwise meta-analysis, and use the net meta package for analyzing the network meta-analysis. So as we can see, the intervention types are the 5 main categories, and then there are other category interventions that as care as usual in the or placebo in the control groups. So these numbers or these blanks that with the yellow color were the main focus of our pairwise analysis and network meta-analysis. So first, I will briefly introduce the pairwise meta-analysis results. So in terms of the major category of multi-component intervention, compared with all other different types of control groups, like also multi-component interventions, MPI, pharmaceutical or supplements or other traditional Chinese medicine, care as usual or no treatment, we can see that multi-component interventions generally had a positive and significant effect size compared with other different types of interventions, except for the supplements and other nutritional interventions, which means that multi-component interventions and the supplement and other nutritional interventions had quite similar effects. And in terms of the MPI, non-pharmaceutical interventions, compared with other type of control groups, we can see that all MPI is quite an effective intervention in improving the daily functioning of people with dementia. And in terms of pharmaceutical interventions compared with all other type of control groups, it is also quite effectiveness compared with other control groups. We can see from the p-value here and the hedges G here. So pharmaceutical is more effective than the pharmaceutical control group, but it's not that significant better than the placebo or the Chinese traditional Chinese medicine group, but it's also better than the cure as usual or no treatment. So placebo and traditional Chinese medicine also had some effectiveness in improving the daily functioning of our participants. And then in terms of the supplements and other nutritional interventions, as the studies were quite limited, only 3 of the studies adopted this type of intervention, we can see that the effect size was not that significant. And the traditional Chinese medicine were kind of really effective compared with other type of control groups, including multi-components, pharmaceutical, placebo, or other traditional Chinese medicine, or cure as usual, or other treatment. So traditional Chinese medicine is kind of a suitable or effective intervention for, especially for our Chinese community, our Chinese population. And then because of the heterogeneity of all the studies, moderation analysis were kind of necessary. So I conducted a series of moderation analysis to explore like what type of factors that moderate the effectiveness of different interventions. So for the interventions of that adopted the intervention of multi-component, we can see that study quality, with some concerns of the study qualities, it reported much higher effectiveness, effect size compared with the studies that are categorized as high quality. And then for the pharmaceutical interventions, we can see that the language for if this study was written in Chinese, it reported quite a large effect size compared with study who were written in English. And then the studies conducted in the hospitals were reported far large effect size compared with studies conducted in the hospitals. And then also study quality is a kind of significant moderator. And then for the intervention that adopted the traditional Chinese medicine interventions, language, setting, and dementia type also are the significant moderators that moderated the effect size. And then I also conducted some meta-regression and found out that age and the percentage of female participants in the studies were non-significant in these in predicting the effect size of the studies. So after getting these pairwise analysis, you may want to know like Dara's research, which type of intervention is most important or most effective in improving the daily functioning of our participants. So I conducted the network meta-analysis. So similar to Dara's graph, thanks for Dara's introduction. I don't have to explain a lot more of background. So we can see that multi-component interventions are, and compared with the control group of pharmaceutical interventions, are kind of consisted the most studies. And then pharmaceutical also had a lot of comparison with the pharmaceutical interventions, and the traditional Chinese medicine also compared with a lot with the pharmaceutical control group. And then in terms of the different type of control groups, we can see that from this part of the result, we can see that multi-component interventions, non-pharmaceutical interventions, pharmaceutical interventions, supplements, and other nutritional interventions, and the traditional Chinese medicine all showed a significant positive effect size compared with the usual care or no treatment control group. So compared with the usual care, all of our interventions showed a much larger effect size compared, which showed their effectiveness in improving the daily functioning of our participants. And as when the control group were the multi-component interventions, we can also see that our intervention groups showed much higher significance effect size, significant positive effect size compared with this control group. And then similar with the NP non-pharmaceutical interventions, all of our intervention groups showed positive and effect size compared with our control group. And when the control group was the pharmaceutical interventions, we can also see that our intervention group showed a significant positive effect size, larger effect size compared with the control group. And also similar situation here in the traditional Chinese medicine group. And one interesting finding is that when compared with the placebo group, only the supplements and other nutritional interventions showed a significant positive effect size, which means that all other type of interventions may not be even better than the placebo control group. So that's one interesting findings. And with all these interesting findings, I also conducted the to rank all the different type of interventions. So we can see that the supplements and other nutritional interventions, traditional Chinese medicine, and the non-pharmaceutical interventions ranked the highest probability to be the best interventions. So in our future research, we may considering including these type of interventions into our own research. And then finally, because we can see that all the different studies had very high heterogeneity, I also tried to measure the publication bias and try to do some sensitivity analysis. So from this funnel plot, we can see that even separate these studies and pair them with different intervention and control groups, these studies all have like a very large publication bias. So I further conducted the agar regression test, and as we expected, the publication bias was quite high. The p-value was less than 0.001. And then when we tried to do the trim and fill method to calculate the bias corrected effect size, so after correction by adding 95 studies, like here, these little dots, and we can see that the pooled effect size become much smaller. The effect size become 0.50, but the significant is still significant, which means that our intervention groups showed much positive effect size compared with the control group. And I also conducted some sensitivity analysis, excluding those studies that only included the post-intervention results, post-test results, and then the results were still significant. So all the sensitivity analysis and the publication bias corrected effect size all showed that all these different type of interventions showed positive effects when improving the daily functioning of our participants. So these are my conclusions. So as I have already introduced, all these type of interventions are similarly effective compared with the control group, and especially the supplements and other nutritional interventions, traditional Chinese medicine, and non-pharmaceutical interventions. But we need to interpret these results with cautions, because these the studies may fall in the category of moderate or low quality, and it has a very large heterogeneity design of this included study. So more robust studies should be conducted in the future, and more of the publication bias issues need to be solved for our future study. So these are my very brief introduction of my study. I will pass back to Gloria.
Thank you so much, Vicky. And actually, we do have a few minutes of time for questions. So perhaps we can bring all the speakers back to the stage, and then let's see if there's any questions from the audience. You can feel free to unmute yourself, or you can put your questions in the chat box if you have any. And while we're waiting, actually, I want to mention something about the quality of and risk of bias of the study. I think, Vicky, you did a wonderful job in looking into these biases and also finding ways to control for it. I just want to, I recall at the beginning when we start to look into the amount of literature in, especially those published in Chinese, Cheng, you'll recall that we actually had to make a difficult decision of cutting down quite a bit because of worry about quality, because yeah, we actually excluded studies that are of too small sample size.
Yes. We have some requirements about these RCTs, including the sample size should be the sample size of each study arm should be bigger than 50, and we also require the study need show a clear diagnostic criteria for dementia or MCI. And also we require only the studies show a low risk of bias in generating random allocation sequence will be included.
So this is already a selected group of publication, but then I can see that you notice there has been a recent explosion of a number of studies in Chinese population. So hopefully in the future we'll have more high quality studies informing us whether our current preliminary findings, quite positive and encouraging findings, can stand the test of more rigorous research. So I see that we have a question from Dr. Dara Leung, and the question is for Dara, I think. So whether why have you selected MMSE as the cognition outcome, and if there were any other scales used to measure cognition in dementia population in China?
Right, thank you, Dr. Leung, for the question. So one of the reasons, maybe the main reason for choosing MMSE, because it's the most commonly used measure among all the studies. So there are other measures that has been used, which include MOCA, ADAS-Cog, and CDR. So for not using CDR, I guess I think an intervention might not be able to change CDR in such a short period of time. But then for the others, there are only around 100 of them, 150 of them using MOCA and ADAS-Cog, and that's why we're focusing now on MMSE only, because there are over 300 and something. And then next step that we can do is to combine MMSE and MOCA to have a standardized effect size, so that we can have more interventions included in the final network meta-analysis. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, and actually that reminds us, well, it's something that we want to share with you tonight. So what we are able to show you in an hour's time is only the major and the most important analysis, if you might. But actually what we are going to do next is a lot of maybe subgroup analysis and also further research questions. And our team will try our best, although we may not be able to do every single analysis. So actually I want to use this occasion as an invitation, because one of the reasons why we have developed this project is that we hope to develop a tool, or not a tool, but information tools that can help people, researchers who are interested in dementia in Chinese populations. So we can use the tools to improve dementia care in Chinese population. So if you are interested in getting involved to make better use of this gigantic database, please do contact us, and we are very happy to have more people involved in this work. Another question, so from Denise Jiang, if I pronounce your name correctly. The question is, did you identify significant differences in interventions for people living in rural versus urban setting? So let's, perhaps Cheng, you might have some ideas.
Yeah, thank you for your question. In the beginning, we were thinking to identify a variable for rural and urban area, but later on we noticed that there are always hospitals. These RCTs were conducted in the hospitals. Well, the hospitals, well, in the urban areas, more hospitals in the urban areas, but their patient, it can be from urban area or rural area. So we can't distinguish whether the patient are from rural area or urban area. So unfortunately, we don't have these variables in the, yeah.
That's actually a good question, and also it links back to Vicky's analysis, looking at actually setting of the study affecting the effectiveness of intervention. And I think this is the situation of many studies conducted in mainland China now, because it's easier to conduct RCTs in hospital settings. However, the findings may not always be translatable to real-world care, because when we say we want to have effective in pharmacological and non-pharmacological intervention, people would need to receive the care and intervention at the place that they can access it. So perhaps that's another major potential research gap if some of you are thinking of what area to further your research is interventions done in Chinese communities in a real-world setting. So that's that's another potential area with major mileage for research. Right. I noticed that his 1 hour seems like just flying past. So I realize the time now, and I will have to thank you all for joining us tonight. And thank you to Dara, Cheng, and Vicky for the wonderful sharing. Before we leave, a reminder that we will have quite a few further exciting events in the coming week, and especially this Saturday. So do come and join us. And also, if we are unable to answer some of your questions tonight, we will there will be further chance this Saturday and also next Monday and Tuesday. So thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.